Hello everyone, Simon Jacobson here. Welcome. I'm honored to be part of the Light of Infinite Festival, discussing the Sefirot of Transformation. One thing we all can agree upon is that there's no one on earth that's a perfect human being. We all have our strengths, but also our weaknesses, our flaws, our blind spots, different pains, traumas, difficulties, setbacks, challenges that we experience. How many billions, if not trillions of dollars are spent on therapy, on medication, healthy or not healthy, on all types of interventions to find some relief, to find some healing. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work. But human beings are consumed with trying to be better people, finding some solace, some comfort. I've thought about this many times. The hours. Did you ever think about how many hours are spent in the waking day where we're thinking about the demons, the darkness, negative thoughts, resentments, jealousies, different vices? Imagine if that was all freed. How much time, how much energy we would have to be able to build and grow. So I want to speak about that very directly. There are two ways to address a problem. We'll call it symptomatic medicine, and one is root medicine. What by that means is one is to address symptoms. Someone has a cut, they put on a Band-Aid. You have a headache, God forbid, take a painkiller. Short-term solutions that can work for more superficial problems. But if you don't heal the issue from the root, you really have not healed. So obviously, when dealing with more serious issues, and you want to have a more permanent solution, you want to have addressed the root cause. The problem is this: when it comes to physical medicine, okay, thank God we have today many breathtaking advancements that have conquered many diseases, have improved the quality of life, extended life expectancy, literally doubled in the last 100 years. But that's physical medicine. There we have, thank God as well, all types of tools and instruments, constantly improving, of course, which include x-rays and CAT scans and different diagnoses and different ways of analyzing and evaluating, and then the different interventions. But when it comes to psychological and emotional issues, there nobody's ever seen the psyche. Nobody's ever seen emotions. So it's a lot of trial and error. And you have different therapeutic models. Some work better than others. But without an actual snapshot of what your subconscious, or I like to call it the superconscious, looks like, how do you really deal with an issue? So again, short-term solutions, you find some way which works or doesn't work. So we've been blessed, and that's the good news. After all this, let's get to the good news. We've been blessed with actually and provided with a blueprint, an x-ray of the soul, the DNA of your very psyche, the building blocks. And who provided this to us? The architect, the cosmic engineer that created us. The human being, the soul, created in the divine image, is a structure. Just as the body is made up of parts, has organs and limbs, and frankly, between 35 trillion and 75 trillion cells, so too the soul, the spirit, the psyche of the person has also components. And only by understanding them well can we get to the root of an issue. Because when you see, let's say you see someone is upset, they get angry. Someone says something to them, it triggered them. Another person may hear exactly the same insult and it doesn't affect them. So you understand that they may be wired differently or they have different experiences. If you grew up in a home with angry parent or angry parents, it's often your go-to way of dealing with issues. Or if you have very deep resentments and deep traumas inside of you, it may be expressed through fits of rage. So you have to understand the forces that are working beneath the surface. So the mystics have given us a blueprint provided to us by the very architect himself of what your soul looks like. And what we're focusing on specifically is your emotions. So overall, people are familiar with the Sefirot. It's a Hebrew word which can be translated like spheres, but actually it means dimensions. I like to use the word building blocks. I mentioned before the DNA. 10 major building blocks. Obviously it breaks down into many more, but generally 10 components. 3 cognitive, 7 emotional. And we're talking about the conscious faculties, the conscious attributes. Then there are the superconscious. This period in time that we are right now, and we're honoring this festival, the Sefirot, is actually called Sefirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, a period that the Bible designates a mitzvah, commandment, that between the second day of Passover to the 49 days later, Shavuot, the holiday when we received the Torah at Sinai, the Jewish people counted. And therefore we have a mitzvah to count every day. But counting is much more than counting. The word Sefirah has actually 3 meanings. It means to count, like the mispar, the saper, to count. It also has the meaning of sipur, the saper, to tell a story. They tell a narrative. And finally, it comes from also the word sapir, Evan Sapir, which means a sapphire stone, an illuminated, a bright, illuminating, radiant stone. So essentially the 10 Sefirot, which are these 10 building blocks, are, yes, have the structural number structure, but they also tell a narrative, a deeper narrative, and finally they illuminate. What do they illuminate? They illuminate the very inner recesses of the inner structure of our psyches. So the 7 weeks, 49 days, 7 times 7, correspond to these building blocks. I actually wrote a book called The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, and an app, My Omer, a free app, you can check it out, where it breaks it down. But I want to talk about what the power of these Sefirot are, and how it can help each one of us in our lives. Because they give you an actual X-ray. So if you were to able to see your emotional structure, you'd be able to then recognize the root of an issue, not just the symptoms. So let's spell out what are these 7 building blocks. They are, and I'll say them in Hebrew and translate it into English. Chesed, love and kindness. Gvura, discipline, measure, moderation. Tiferet, compassion, empathy, beauty. Netzach, endurance, resilience, determination, fortitude, persistence. Hod, humility, yielding, flexibility. Yesod, bonding, foundation. And finally, the 7th, Malchut, dignity, majesty. These 7 encompass every emotional reaction you will ever have or you ever had. They break down further. That's why 7 times 7, 49, because each one, love has within it chesed within chesed, the gvura within chesed, the teferes within chesed. Because for love to be effective, it also needs discipline, it needs moderation, it needs compassion, it needs fortitude, and so on. So essentially what we're provided with here is the unbelievable gift. No therapist, no psychologist, no psychiatrist can provide that to you. It's an actual X-ray of what your emotional psyche looks like, the spectrum of your emotions. Now the question is, and this is the actual exercise, is for us to evaluate through introspection and soul searching into each one of these components. Just like you go to a doctor and a doctor will take the right tests and diagnostics and x-rays and so on to be able to establish what does your nervous system look like, what are your muscles, muscular system, your circulatory system. Find places there may be some weaknesses or blockages, God forbid, that need to be addressed. Take an x-ray of the lungs. You ever see? The doctor will put it up on a screen and then juxtapose it near another, like healthy lungs, and then you could compare. So by looking at the map of these emotions, we now have a contrast. We have something a template, if you wish. You ever see little children when they're born, they breathe. You can actually see their chests heaving up and down because their lungs are perfect. And therefore they're using 100% of them. Us adults, we use 70, 80% of our lungs. There's already toxins and other pollutants that affect the way we breathe. So the same thing is here. We have a blueprint. So the question that one has to ask, and this is essentially the journey of these 49 days, is let's zoom in. Week 1, what is your love like? And break it down, not just love. The love within love, the discipline within love. And the same thing week after week after week, day after day. So essentially, it's a journey into your own self, a journey of self-discovery, self-awareness, and you can then gauge and evaluate and actually diagnose. Like, for example, let's take most basic example, love. We all need love, we all need to give love, we all need to receive love. But let's try to evaluate your type of love. Some people, very natural to them, they just love. They're giving, they say yes easily. It could be parents to children, siblings, it could be friends, spouses, however it manifests itself. There are other people, for them love doesn't come easily. They always say no before they say yes, or maybe. Much more discretion, much more careful, caution. Not always bad, it's just another personality type. Not talking about someone who doesn't give love at all or has difficulties, but it's just a different way of expressing themselves. Each one of them have pros and cons. The one who gives easily often may not know when to stop giving. You can also suffocate someone with your love. You could give love in a way where the person who's receiving it is overwhelmed. Think of rain. When it's raining, the Talmud tells a story about a big drought in Israel. And the sage was praying, Choni HaMagal was praying for rain, and it began to rain, but the rain came down in buckets. It was flooding the fields, destroying them, just as bad as a drought. So he had to say a second prayer and says, Reiv Tova ein yachem lekabel. Too much good we cannot receive. The rain has to come down in raindrops. That's why it's called Gevurot Geshamim, raindrops. So it has chesed, kindness and love, that's the rain, but in drops that can be absorbed in a paste fashion. So it's the gvura within chesed, the gvura of kshamim, gvurat kshamim. And the same thing in communication. You can be a great speaker, a great teacher, a great conveyor of ideas, but you have to know how to pace yourself. Are the recipients receiving it well? There are many people, brilliant teachers, and they get so consumed with their brilliance. In the language of the Kabbalah, a lot of light, but the kalim, the containers, are unable to receive it. It's too much. It's all about measuring the flow. So the gvura adds that element of measure within your love. You can spoil people with love. You can overwhelm them. Now that doesn't mean it should stop the flow, but it should mean it should be measured. It should be channeled. If chesed is the gas, gvura is the brakes. The person who discipline comes naturally to them, maybe there's too much discipline. Maybe there needs to be a little more affection, a little more empathy, a little more kindness. So it's all about balance. And when you ask these questions, you will find out quite quickly where you stand. Obviously, you need to be honest with yourself. So it'd be good to take a journal and write down, okay, here is my profile, so to speak. And as you do this day after day, you will start seeing a picture emerge of yourself, and you'll be quite surprised. I recently got a phone call from Salt Lake City, of all places. It's a psychiatrist who runs a rehab center there. Drug, alcohol, other addictions. Non-Jewish facility. And most of his people there are not necessarily Jewish. And he said to me, I got a hold of your Omer book. I'm not sure how he got it. He says, this may be self-serving, but he said, it's excellent. It's the only tool that I really use that is a required reading by all my clients and patients. And I have them do it day by day. He says, I hope you don't mind. We do it throughout the year, not just 49 days between Passover and Shavuot. We do it all year round. And they're required to follow every day and actually evaluate themselves. Where do you stand? And 6 months later, compare notes and see, have you grown in that area? Because the more you're aware, obviously, as they say, Yediyah tamach lechetzi refuah, awareness of a problem is half the cure. That awareness, in turn, creates focus, and as such, you can start improving. Some recognize that they have a lot of chesed and very little gevurah, a lot of love to give, but they don't know how to discipline it. Sometimes the other way around. And going through all the 7 emotions, and I will elaborate some more, just using this as an example. And he says that literally I see evidence of actual change. Because it's not just I'm going to be a better person. It's not just I'm going to improve my life. You're actually focusing. It's like saying a doctor will say to you, you need to be healthier. But what does that mean? What does that specifically spell out in your diet, in your hygiene, in your sleeping patterns, in your exercise? What vitamins, what minerals should I be taking? So the more detail, it's all in the details, the more detail you can spell out, the more you can focus. And you see where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses. It's actually, I would say, not just mind-blowing, it's life-changing. People had this map, and they can then work with it. It literally allows you to see yourself in a new way. I've seen it from my work with myself, I've seen work with others. You start recognizing, I thought it's pretty good in a certain area, and then you realize not necessarily. Maybe, from 1 to 10, it could be a 1, it can be a 10, but you start recognizing. So let's go through some of the others. But the real objective of all of this, of course, is understanding not just dealing with symptoms, but actually with the roots. So transformation can only happen when you get to the root of things. That's where things are transformed. You can change on a cosmetic level or on a superficial level or to some extent things, but when you want to really rewire something, you have to go back into the engine room. And this is the engine room. So let's go through the rest of them, just briefly. And obviously, the work then is in each one of our hands, but it has the ability to literally transform every aspect of your life. So let's talk about, I spoke about chesed and gvura. Let's talk about the next, empathy, compassion, tiferet. Now it's interesting, tiferet also means beauty. Say something is the kavod ula tiferet. Beautiful. What is beauty? Let's define beauty. It's one of those elusive words, very hard to define. When you say a beautiful face, a beautiful tapestry, beautiful piece of art. What is it? Is it one specific thing, a face? Is it the eyes, the ears, the nose, the complexion, the lips? The answer is it's all the above. Beauty is harmony within diversity. It's different components. When they're organized in the right way, they create a beautiful structure. One musical note may be a nice note, but you can't call it beautiful. Because if you keep replaying it, it'll just become monotonous and noise. Same thing with one beautiful color. Blue may be your favorite color. Red, green, orange, whatever. But beauty is when you take many different colors, many different hues, many different notes, and you combine them in the right balance, in the right harmony, then you have beauty. A beautiful face is a combination of things. It's the sum total. A person can have beautiful eyes, but if they're not situated perfectly, or it's not balanced right, So using the terms of the mystics, is the world is diverse. Diversity, the multitude of details I mentioned before, just 35 to 75 trillion cells just in one human being. Imagine what is out there. I mean, beyond imagination, unfathomable. Now, many details can also lead to what? Chaos. Can lead to confusion. Can lead to war, to divisiveness, to violence. And unfortunately, we've seen the history of human beings, of different opinions, control, power, and all the injustices that people can perpetrate on each other. But at the same time, diversity is only the only way to get to beauty. So yeah, if we only had one cell, we had only one human being on this earth, one color, one musical note, there'd never be battle, there'd never be conflict, there'd never be divisiveness, because there are no two to argue. It's like one person on an island. I mean, you could argue with yourself. So diversity is the essence of harmony. Harmony means many different forces all balanced together. So Tiferes' role, interestingly, in the 7 emotions is balance. It's a balance of chesed and gvura, but it's more than the sum of the parts, because we already have love and we have the discipline within love. We have discipline and we have the love within discipline. So Tiferes introduces another dimension, and in the emotional spectrum, it's called compassion, empathy, which goes far beyond love. Love is kindness. Empathy, compassion, is even where a situation may not deserve kindness, but you still show mercy. You still show compassion. The way of the Torah, the way the mystics explain it, that compassion also has that ability to go beyond the regular structure. That's why Tiferes, in the structure of the spheres, is considered to be the middle path. Think of like the spine. It runs from the top to the bottom. Mavriach min hakotza lakotza is an expression in the Bible, in the Torah, that is the rod that runs from one end to the other. It's that equilibrium, the centrifugal force that balances things. If we had a right and a left, chesed and gvura, that's very powerful, but you don't have balance. So Tiferes introduces that balance. So it's more than just creating a healthy love and a healthy discipline, it's bringing them all together. And it's always with a measure of empathy. Empathy, as I said, is a broad context, a broad concept that's required in everything we do. No matter what we do, we need a measure of empathy, feeling for another. Now today they call it mirror neurons. Now you imagine, let's say you see someone, it's a negative example, but it works. You see someone about to close a door or a trunk on their fingers, and you'll actually like say, ouch. You'll cringe, even though it's not you, but there's a way we mirror other people's neurons because there's some connection between us. So Tiferes is also a type of unifying element that integrates everything. So it's, of course, a critical component. Many times when you describe sociopaths, or definitely psychopaths, they always say lack of empathy. When you talk about a narcissist, you'll often talk about lack of empathy. An inability to feel another through their eyes, not through their eyes. Not to see the world only through what's in it for me, or how does it reflect on me, but also to actually step aside and allow yourself to see through another. So it has also an element of humility, which we'll talk about more later in Hod, but it's a combination of all the above. So you can imagine how critical that is. So there you have week 3, we focus on understanding that empathy. Then comes week 4, the week of which is actually this week that we are in right now, Netzach. Netzach I translated before, fortitude, determination, ambition, persistence. It literally means netzachon, victory. But victory doesn't always mean just victory at a war, a physical war. It also could be a spiritual war. It could be a psychological, emotional one. It's the force within us that drives us forward. You could have chesed, gvura, tiferet. You could have love, discipline, balance, but not necessarily a drive. Will you fight for the person you love? That would be the netzach within love. Will you fight for the person you love? When I say fight, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's a confrontational situation, or you'll only love when there's no resistance, when there's no challenges. So that's a critical component in all commitment, to have that element of persistence. Persistence means you don't give up easily. Now, where does that come from? It comes from a very profound aspect in our emotional psyche, which is called netzach, that midas hanetzachon. Now, often resistance and challenges is what brings that out. Like the Talmud tells us, the olive doesn't produce oil until you pressure it. Or an example, a more contemporary, I don't know if it's contemporary, but an example that a human being is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong you are until you put into hot water. So it's the challenges in life and the resistances, and we should only be blessed with healthy challenges and resistance, that forces us out of our comfort zone, that presses and pressures us, and therefore allows deeper resources to be revealed. That's what this fourth element is. I would say, especially in certain cases of healing, the key is not to give up, is to be persistent, because very often we'll have setbacks. And we'll have situations where we say, you know what, I'm not making any progress. That's one of the big enemies, the voice that comes that says that you've failed. And it's not worth not doing anything. So I'll introduce to you a concept from the Baal Shem Tov called, in Yiddish, the Schwindeltreppe. It's the Yiddish word for a spiral staircase. Now it's interesting, it's called Schwindeltreppe. Schwindel in Yiddish means swindle, like swindling staircase. Now why would you call that staircase like a swindler? A swindler is like someone who's swindling you, someone who's fooling you. Because that's exactly what it does. When you walk up a regular staircase, so you know step by step by step, you see the destination, even if it's a long staircase. However, in a spiral staircase, which is used very often architecturally, both for aesthetics, but also when you don't have enough space, it spirals. The staircase goes like that. So as you climb the staircase, you have to constantly make turns, revolutions, to the point that as you go upward, you have to turn your back to the destination. Which means, as soon as you're about to get to the apex, to the top of the staircase, your back is turned the other direction. You can convince yourself, I made no progress. Says the Baal Shem Tov that life is like a spiral staircase, that it swindles us into thinking that you actually have made progress, but you don't see it. And we give up right when we're about to get to the destination. We don't see it through. You have to remember that every good deed, every good thought, every good word changes things. You may not see it immediately. Some people have the eyes to see, sometimes we're blessed to see, sometimes we don't. But never think that a good thing does not release, as the Tanya puts it, infinite amount of energy, infinite light. However, we are finite human beings, so we don't always see it. So persistence is a critical component in life. It's the idea that see it through. Don't give up just because you don't see results immediately. You plant a seed. Seeds don't produce immediately. It takes time for it to become absorbed in the ground and begin to sprout. And then you see a tree years later and you say, where did that tree come from? It came from a seed. And it's a process, and it emerges. We have to always keep in mind, especially in this fast food generation where everybody's looking for quick fixes, keep in mind the biggest things, the most important things in life emerge and are a process. Yes, you can right now order something from Amazon and in a half hour have it at your door. That's mechanics. That's physical material items. Love, truth, soul, God, happiness. Those are all things that you need to plant the seed and be persistent and water it and protect it and nurture it, and then it begins to emerge. Respect the process of emergence and the process itself. Process and emergence. Netzach. And that too is a critical component that's necessary in general, and also in each of the other, we've spoken already about 3 of them. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, now Netzach. Then comes Hod. Hod, in a way, is like a balance to Netzach. If Netzach is determination and persistence, Hod is also humility. The word Hod comes from many different expressions, but one of them is Hoda'ah, acknowledgement. Like we say, Moda'ani. Moidim anachnu lach. Hodu, an expression. Yehuda, the fourth of the tribes. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, from the word hida, hoda'ah, to acknowledge. It's a combination of gratitude, humility, modesty, essentially, and flexibility. There's a powerful expression by the sages. It says, La'olam, a person should always be Yehei Adam Rach Kekana, Ba'al Tehei Kasha Ke'erez. Always be flexible like a reed, and not hard and inflexible like a cedar tree. So there's power to cedar. That's like Netzach. It's very powerful. But there's also power to a seemingly a very weak reed because it sways in the wind. When a storm comes, so yes, strong trees will stand, but also the storm is strong enough, it will bring down a strong tree because it doesn't have any flexibility. A reed blows in the wind, so it will survive even the great storms. In architecture today, when you talk about, for example, expansion bridges, you have skyscrapers. I remember once when we were kids and going on a hike in camp, and we went on one of these bridges, and it was shaking. And we thought the bridge was weak. And the counselor explained to us, no, the bridge is built in with that element of flexibility so it can carry much more weight. High skyscrapers are made in a way they sway in the wind. They don't sway extreme, but they move. Because if they were just rigid and inflexible, a strong wind can bring them down, God forbid. So how is that flexibility? Imagine combining that with the persistence, with the drive and the determination of Netzach. Then you have true resilience because you have the ability to both drive forward, but you also have the ability to take a punch, so to speak. Absorb the flexibility that's necessary. True leaders need to be very driven, determined, Netzach types, but they also need Hod to have sensitivity, to know where to be flexible, to know where to yield. Okay, so we have two more. Yesod and Malchut. Yesod. Yesod literally means foundation. It too is in the center, like Tiferet. It's a centrifugal force. It's a center. It's a balancing. Foundation means, what is a foundation? A foundation makes sure you can have a beautiful building, but if it doesn't have a Yesod, a foundation, it's not going to stand. Foundation is invisible, but it's critical. Everything is built upon it. In the emotional context, it's the foundation when we say, for example, in a relationship, in marriage, one of the great blessings you can give a marriage is to build a binyan ade ad, to build a eternal edifice, al yesodei haTorah v'hamitzvot, on the foundations of Torah and mitzvahs. Foundation introduces an element of eternity, of consistency, essentially commitment, and therefore one of the ways to express that is the bonding. You can love someone, but you're not necessarily bonded with them. Bonding means you become indispensably connected, unconditionally connected. You become indispensable to each other. True commitment. I mean, just recently I was speaking to someone. It really was quite disturbing to me. A fellow, he's a really good guy, lives in New York. And he was telling me, he's a guy that doesn't want to settle down. He wants to keep his options open. He's enjoying life. He says to me, Rabbi Jacobson, I recently discovered something I was looking for all my life, to be able to love someone without commitment. So he has a girlfriend, and I guess they love each other in some way. They think they love each other. And he's learned to love without commitment. That means that he always has a back door. He could always do other things. I remember listening to him, and I said to him, does she know about it? He says, no, I haven't figured out how to explain that to her. And I started to tell him, love and commitment are synonymous, my friend. There's no such thing as real love without commitment. You could have commitment maybe without love, committed to a contract, to a business, to a job you have. But love, by definition. So he had chesed, but no yesod. And when you don't have yesod, you don't have that continuous, that that eternal component that's called to bond with something. Interestingly, in the cognitive faculties, das, chachma bina das, which is not the topic of our conversation here, but chachma is the spark of an idea, bina is developing, and das is what's called hiskashrus, to connect to it, that you bond with the idea. That's also in the middle path. So what das is in the cognitive, yesod is in the emotions. It's emotional commitment. Yeah, when people say they have commitment issues, people say, I care, but I don't really see it as unconditional. I don't see it as absolute. I don't see it as eternal. Then they're lacking something. You need to have that element. Now, I'm not saying just commit to anything just because it comes your way, but it's something to explore. What have you bonded with in your life? What things do you really feel absolute that they're not optional, they're not arbitrary? And finally, we come to Malchut. Malchut literally means kingship, like Malchut, a king, a queen, majesty, but I'll use the word dignity. We all are kings and queens, princes and princesses. So it's the sense of self-esteem. It's when a mother looks with love into her newborn's eyes. Anyone with love, they're not just giving them love, they're giving them dignity, respect. You can have all the 6 emotions that I mentioned: love, discipline, empathy, determination, persistence, humility, bonding. But if you don't feel self-respect, if you don't have self-esteem, you don't feel like you're a king or a queen in your domain. And I don't mean that in a way of arrogance or power. On the contrary, a sense of value, a sense of dignity, then all those 6 emotions are great tools and instruments, but what's lacking is that confidence that you need. So Malchus is gauging your confidence level, your self-esteem level. And again, you need to be honest. So if you were to sit down now and take these 7, as I described them, and obviously there are more details involved, and evaluate, you're going to come away with a nice assessment that may surprise you. I assure you that it will surprise you, of your strengths and your weaknesses. Because not all of them you're going to have a 10. I mean, I would think any honest person doesn't have a 10 in any of the 7, meaning 1 to 10. But some will be stronger and some will be weaker. And some you may need to think about more. And sometimes you may need to ask somebody else. Sometimes you think you're very strong in one area and the person that loves you or you love them say, no, you're not as strong as you think you are. So it's also a humbling experience of self-awareness. But that's where growth comes and that's where transformation comes. Nobody ever grows if you stay in your comfort zone. Like they say, nothing changes if nothing changes. Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Well, the way I like to put it is, if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, you know what you're going to have? What you had. It's a mathematical certainty. Because life is all about growth and movement, so you need to do something. People say, I want something to change, but they're not ready to change anything on their own. Where do you think the change is going to come from? Some miracle? So it all begins with a shift. Think differently, speak differently, do something differently, then the results will be perhaps different. Bring fresh air into the picture. But that requires honesty, sincerity, integrity, and requires courage, because it's always easier to remain in your comfort zone. Because that's why it's called a comfort zone. It's comfortable. And I remember visiting Arizona a few times. There's a lot of retirement villages, and they have towns there that are built, cities built for people who want to retire. And the names really made me smile, but it's also sad. Carefree Arizona. I don't know if there's a comfort zone Arizona. For some reason, Arizona is one of these places. I understand comfort zones. We all like comfort. We all like carefree. But there's something that it does that also dulls your powers and strengths, because the drive in life to succeed requires getting out of your comfort zone. So look, if somebody feels extremely comfortable, I'm not here to rock their boat. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, even though someone once gave me I guess it was a humorous little thing. They gave me a business card. They said, you make miserable people happy and happy people miserable. Meaning, you bring hope and spirit to people who are not in good mood, and people who are too comfortable, you make them a little uncomfortable. Which, may be a compliment, but it's not necessarily the mission of my life. The point is that comfort zones are very nice, but they're not going to allow you to grow. Now, we all should have a certain measure of angst. That's what makes someone grow. I'm not saying too high, but I remember a cardiologist who was coming to my classes. Very sweet guy, but he had a very difficult life, a lot of personal challenges. And he said to me once, can you pray for me just one day of calm? Just a day of total animal bliss, peace. He had a good sense of humor, so I said to him, doctor, do you mean like a flat line? He said, no, not that peaceful. We all know a flat line means, God forbid, the heart stopped. A cardiogram, think of a cardiogram, talk about an x-ray. A cardiogram is a wave, peaks and valleys, contraction, expansion of the heart. The exhale and inhale of the breath, what we call the rotzei v'shuv, that the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Yecheskel says, rotzei v'shuv, tension and resolution, v'achayis rotzei v'shuv, is the essence of life. Life is constantly moving. It's part of a larger narrative, and there are ups and downs, and it's a wave. That's what you want. You don't want to be just comfortable in one static place, a couch potato doing nothing. That's not life. That's fighting the very nature of life. Life is mobility, movement. But you want it balanced. If the peaks are too high, that's too high of anxiety. If the valleys are too low, that's too low resolution. You need to have a healthy measure of angst, like climbing the staircase, one step forward, and then you climb to the next step, a next step, a next step. That's the journey of transformation of this period in time. We'll call the Sefirot journey of transformation. Going step by step through the spectrum and structure of your emotions, analyzing, evaluating, and looking to refine those actual aspects. It's not just about awareness, it's refinement. That's the ultimate story of Sefirah. You count, but you're telling a narrative, your inner story. And it's an illuminating one. Sapphire, like sapphire. It's an illuminating one. And that's the ultimate goal, is to align ourselves with these inner rhythms that are pulsating within us all the time. That's what creates a healthier person. And though, as I said, none of us are perfect, and we won't become perfect, but we become better. And remember, perfection is the enemy of the good, as they say. You become better. You're constantly improving. What you really want is to free yourself from the traps of Mitzrayim, because we all began the counting on the second day of Passover. Mitzrayim means all the limitations, the constraints, the inhibitions, the fears, the insecurities that come from our traumas, from our challenges in life, the difficulties. We're freeing ourselves. We're learning to spread our wings. So instead of focusing on fighting the dark, on conquering demons, we're focusing on bringing in the light, the sapphire light of the Sefirah within our souls. And that we shine. V'sfartam lachem means not just that you shall count, but you shall shine. And you shall tell the story of your life, the ultimate life, that you sing your song, that you express yourself, you spread your wings, blossom, and be the best you can possibly be. That's the story, my friends. And again, it's a great honor to be part of this festival and to share these few words. Hopefully they will affect me and hopefully yourself as well. Words from the heart enter the heart. Thank you again. This has been Simon Jacobson. Be blessed and be well, and I thank the hosts and continue to enjoy this festival.